This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
Okay, what's up, Order of the Garter? This is Stephen, your host with Fantology Podcast, along with my lifelong friends Ryan and Josh, talking about the second book in the Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks called Shadow's Edge. We just reviewed The Way of Shadows, which I think should have come out last week. Sometimes we get our recordings a little mixed up. But here we are in book 2, kind of rapidly going through and getting ready for the continuation on the trilogy with Night Angel Nemesis coming out in May. I think it's May. So Josh, Ryan, book 1 out of the way. How did book 2 compare? What did you guys think?
Well, I'll go first with kind of a hot take. So you may remember that I was not super in on book number 1. I didn't love it as much as I think Ryan and Steven did. But
yeah, you were 2, like a kind of 6 out of 10-ish.
I was at 6 out of 10. Yeah, like above average. Okay. And if we factor in that it's the first published book, that, would raise it up, in my opinion. But, I there's a lot that I didn't love about it per se. But this book, on the other hand, the second book, I really enjoyed. I thought it was a lot better than the first book in a lot of ways.
Okay.
So it's not like anywhere near a perfect book. I would probably, I don't know if we want to give ratings right now, but it would be definitely up, like a point and a half maybe. And I can get into that. I think I have some reasons why for me it worked a little bit better than the first. But overall, those are my thoughts about how it compared to the first book.
Ryan, in our review of The Way of Shadows, you were really positive. Like, this is kind of a nostalgia series for you a little bit, and you enjoyed the first book a lot. So how did the second book stack up? Did you also like it more than book 1?
No, I think I'm going to go opposite of Josh. I think that it wasn't quite, I think that some of the flaws in the plot structure are a bit more evident to me in this book. And so I think it's not quite as good as book 1, but that's not to say it's not a good book. I still really enjoyed a lot of parts of it. And so I think if you like book 1, then you're going to like book 2.
So in The Way of Shadows, our review structure was Ryan liked it the most. I was in the middle. Josh was at the bottom. Looks like Ryan and Josh are going to duke it out for who liked it the most, because I don't think I liked it as much as either of you guys. I think I don't think it was quite as good as the first one, to be honest. Maybe, I don't know, just like the expansion into the bigger world didn't work for me quite as much. And that's okay if it did for you, but I kind of enjoyed the more contained story in one place. And I just felt like there were a lot of places and ideas and things hinted at that weren't ever like fully explored. And I get it, like there's a third book and he's planning on writing even more in the world, but it's maybe a little frustrating to me to get glimpses of places and factions and groups, and they never really get fleshed out too much more than kind of like surface level, oh, these guys are the Aes Sedai and these guys are the Children of the Light type things, which was about as far as the descriptions I connected with some of the groups.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Unfortunately, just in those comparisons you just made. I think it's tough. Book 2 is a tough book in a trilogy, and I think a lot of authors fall into the fact that you need to do a lot of building to get where you want for book 3. And I think this book is no exception to that. It's a little bit of a slump, and yeah, there are, book 1 is just able to be a little bit more contained, and then you have to expand. And that expansion, I think there are some growing pains.
Okay, so I disagree with you guys. I think that
okay.
I do get where you're coming from, that like the expansion hurt this book, and I'm not disagreeing with that necessarily, but I think that while it expanded the world in a way that wasn't maybe flawless, I think that the storylines that it gave were a lot more, in a sense, contained. Like there is a lot more.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were about to spoil it. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm not going to spoil anything, but I think that for book 1, I think that there are a lot of different places and ways that the book went, if that makes sense. Like there were a lot of time jumps, there's a lot of situation jumps with Kylar, like going through his training. I feel like that wasn't handled
Mhm.
super well, because it kind of just felt like he was becoming different characters, like from one chapter to the next. And so those were kind of some of the issues that I had with the first book, as well as it still did introduce you to a lot of politics and intrigue and stuff that I don't feel like was handled super well. It was handled well enough that it was compelling, but I feel like the second book, and we can get into spoilers, but I feel like that there were a lot of really interesting storylines that felt a lot more cohesive to me, and that worked together to create a stronger narrative than book one, even if the world building, I agree, wasn't the best.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. I think for me, I really love coming of age type stories. And book one, we got that a lot. It was like hyper focused on Kylar for the most part. And this, I mean, it was still focused on Kylar, but it did expand into a bunch of other characters. And I do agree with you that I think overall there were more plot lines that were interesting than the somewhat straightforward plot line in the first book. But for whatever reason, even if it's flawed, a coming of age story just kind of gets me every time. And so I like the Way of Shadows for that mostly.
I guess to me, this one felt almost more like a coming of age story, because although, yeah, the first one did have Kylar going from like a little kid into like a young adult. I feel like this one actually had him dealing with the ramifications of him being a young adult, and like actually you saw that growth. Whereas the first book, it was more like, oh, now I can have these abilities. It wasn't real. It didn't spend too much time on his character, like his mindset and his how he was going to deal with these things. It was just like, oh, now he's like a fully trained assassin or Wepway. Versus this book, it's how does being a fully trained assassin in Wepway, what does that allow for me to do, and how am I going to square those ethics within myself?
Yeah, I think we could kind of compare. I mean, we don't want to do spoilers for other series, but there's a pretty natural comparison to Mistborn, because it's kind of a similar, it's not as Mistborn's not as dark, but there's definitely like a self-contained somewhat mission in the first book, and it's a really gritty kind of dark world, and there's a group of underworld thieves and assassins and kind of both. So but I think that, yeah, in Mistborn, Vin deals with more emotions and is kind of a more fleshed out character, and Kylar is a little bit of a just kind of empty slate in the first book. Like he doesn't really deal with too much. He always seems to be, I mean, he deals with the idea of like, oh, can I kill these people? What's gonna, what is the ethical ramifications here? But it's never like weighs on him too much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think the other comparison we could make is Name of the Wind, which is, again, my favorite book. And in Name of the Wind, Quoth deals with a lot of emotions and is just really wonderfully done. And again, I think the comparison there is, Kylar just doesn't go through quite as much. So I don't know. I guess the coming of age nature of the story still kind of gets me, but I do see the flaws now that you point that out.
It's funny because the comparison I was thinking was more Robin Hobb, Assassin's Apprentice and Assassin.
Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah.
And I feel like those books, I mean, we're not going to spoil that series either. But I feel like those books spend a lot less time focusing on like the actual abilities of the character and like, oh, now he can assassinate cool people in interesting ways. Focus a lot more on, it's like a character study more than like a young adult like YA movie script, if that makes sense. Anyway, I think that they're all really interesting, and that this book, I think it does carve out an interesting position for itself within the landscape of all these other books that we're talking about. I think it does a good job of that, and I'm surprised. I don't know if I'm just like oblivious to it, but I don't really hear the series being talked about so much. Like I've been tangentially aware of it and heard Night Angel talked about, and I've known it was like Brent Week's book and stuff like that. But I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of surprised with the way it
Yeah.
combines all these different aspects. that it's not-
Lightbringer is definitely more popular for him. I like that we mentioned all these series because they're all kind of contemporaries to each other, written around kind of, the late 2000s. Actually, I can't remember when the Fitz books came out. I feel like those might have
I think
been
those were a little bit earlier.
earlier.
Those were, I
2000s.
think, 90s.
Were they
I think
late
late
90s?
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
late 90s.
But yeah, those do a really good job of getting you into a character's head and like dealing with super intense emotions without it being boring, which is very challenging.
I think that the flaws are pretty evident in this book. It's not really going to be something that somebody who's looking for like a book that's very like, I don't know, stimulating in terms of like in a literary sense. I think a lot of the fantasy is a bit more derivative, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just, I think it's simpler taste. And I do think that it is probably a book that's like much more appealing to like an adolescent, like a boy, and in the sense that like that's what Kylar is. The portrayal of women are it's a little hard to read just because they're very sexualized, or their appearance, I guess. It's just I think it would be a hard book for me to recommend to anybody, because of those flaws. It's like it takes I think unique, I don't know, or just a person with a certain taste in order to get past those, I guess.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's not even like there's anything super explicit that happens in the book. Like actual on-screen things is like PG-13.
I know, that's the funny
probably.
part. Yeah.
So
well,
it's
except for the violence, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean in terms of sexuality and stuff, like I feel like mostly it reminds me of like a PG-13 kind of edgy like young adult movie where it kind of like does take like low like slow pans up like the
kind of like a Riverdale situation.
Where like pans up the
like
woman's body and like
everyone's super
yeah.
like obsessed with sex, but at the same time it doesn't really
you don't really see
much
anything.
of it.
Yeah. And it's funny because I agree, like it's almost harder to recommend this to people. Like I feel cringe, like I would feel more cringe recommending this versus something like The First Law, which definitely has like way more explicit sex scenes in it, but or even like A Song of Ice and Fire. But they're like handled differently.
Deals
like
with
it's like
the
more
adult topic in an adult way.
Yeah, right. Not that any of those would be like super pornographic or anything, but like they are, there's more shown on page versus this, but it does feel like it's handled in an adult way, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Game of Thrones and that was somewhat pornographic, so yeah. Yeah.
The TV series that coined the term sextaposition, I think it was. Rather than juxtaposition.
Or
I think
exposition.
Sex position. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
Anyway,
that's the one.
Let's get in. I want to get into spoilers.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Let's do it. Okay. So the book starts with Kylar having retired to live a peaceful life and never kill anyone again with his beloved Aline, and they go off to this city called Carnarvon, which is just kind of a little bit a ways away from Scenaria. And of course, this is going to go great, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. I like this because I feel like you usually have like the conclusion of like a trilogy or like, I don't know, a fairly standalone book, and then the hero rides off into the sunset, and then for whatever reason he's not content just being a farmer, right? Something comes up, and so that's obviously the trope that happens here. But I like that it's handled like so early in the series that Kylar, he like tries to settle down, but like he fails like pretty quickly, obviously. But I mean, I think that uniqueness of this is, I guess, the placement, where it's only one book in and he's already like got the girl that he loves and everything's happy. Oh wait, no, it isn't.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, I feel like this this was a very interesting way to take the series, because on one level it shows just how much there was lacking in terms of, you know, the actual maturity and actual relationships between characters in the first book. I'm glad that that wasn't just covered up. Like it shows, okay, like now you have these two people that like should, I guess, be in love, maybe because they're like kind of both infatuated with each other, but haven't really had more than like an hour's worth of conversation since they were like, you know, 7, 8 years old, 9 years old or whatever. And so now they're like supposed to be married. I think it does like a pretty believable job in how it handles that.
Yeah, I think it's believable in the sense that as the reader, you're like, why are these people together? Because I mean, just because they're both attracted to each other and that's basically it.
And circumstance. I mean,
Yeah,
they are
and
like
circumstance
entrusted to this.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. So there's some things keeping them together, but at the same time, they're like, their relationship is just so cringe and they're not honest with each other. And it just seems doomed to fail, or, you know, require some really meaningful growth that doesn't happen for pages and pages. And we're just kind of like in the city and they're struggling and there's all kinds of teen angst. And I don't know. I just thought that this was just really cringe to read, but at the same time, understandable for the characters to behave in this way.
I think as somebody whose favorite book is The Name of the Wind, there's a lot less teen angst and cringiness in this than there's like a few
I don't
chapters.
know if
I'm
we should
fine.
go there.
But
I'm fine with Josh. I'm fine with teen angst. That always kind of adds to the romance, and I think it's interesting. But I just thought it was too cringy in this book.
I don't know. I think that there's like a few chapters of him being like in the city where he's also dealing with like taking on his vigilante, like Night Angel status. I thought that was an interesting, like, oh, how is he going to deal with this like compulsion to deliver justice with somebody who's like a pacifist? I thought that was like an interesting take. And it's kind of like if Batman had like a magical compulsion to actually go out and be Batman, but at the same time, like the person he was in love with like also was a pacifist and didn't thought that he was doing what was like super unethical. I think it was an interesting dilemma, and I don't know. I enjoyed that part.
I still think it's frustrating that I don't understand why Eileen was such a crazy pacifist.
She's a pacifist.
Yeah, but like, I mean, she grew up in the slums with Kylar, and
she's very religious, and I think that plays a large part in
I don't know. I just don't see how anyone in this crappy world can really like hold to that type of belief too long.
I mean, it is a bit of like idealism. Also, I think that like the fact that they're both still virgins at this point in their life, after like, you know, spending all that time like growing up on the streets, and then Kylar's an assassin and all that, it's a little unbelievable. So I mean, like, I think if you like, look at things that closely, it does maybe take away from it a bit. But I do agree with Josh a bit, where it is kind of fun to see how like these two teenagers like suddenly try and play adult, and then running into all of these issues. And you know, Kylar at the end of it, he's kind of like, he realizes that the way they are now, they're not really compatible.
Yeah. I do think, along with what you're saying about the whole virginity thing, I think that one of the cringiest parts of the whole series is like the virginity as a substitute, I guess, for like morality. It's like, oh, Kylar can like go out and like be killing people unjustly, but because he like resisted Mama Kay's like prostitute that she had for him or whatever, he's like an upright man. Like, it's just it is kind of weird. And also like that's like the main distinction, like that's the main difference between Vi And oh geez, I just blanked on her name.
Elaine.
Elaine, like, is that Vi like has sex and Elaine doesn't? Like, other than that, they're like pretty much very, very similar in their characters.
Well,
And
I mean, one
and the
is
fact
a
that she's a wet boy.
yeah, one is
But
a
like
wet
in
boy,
terms of
wet girl.
yeah, but other than that, like the only thing they do is fantasize about Kylar and like how much they want to be with him. You know,
Vi
I don't know.
doesn't spend, I mean, it does get that to that point at the end of the book, but I wouldn't say she fantasizes the whole book about being with Kylar. She's kind of like, she kind of, I guess she does like have some of those teenage girl moments where she's like, oh, Kylar was kind of cute there. And then she's like, what am I thinking?
Yeah, but that's like everything that she does is like leading to Kylar's kind of cute. What am I thinking? Like, oh, how can I position myself so that he's seeing my butt? Like,
That's at the end of the book, like what I was saying.
Yeah, okay.
But I think during the like middle of the book, you see a lot of, Vi. Like, I think her motivation is like interesting. She's like trying to get free from Hugh Gibbet, this monster who has shaped her. But like even when she has the opportunity to kill him, she isn't able to. Maybe that's like,
Yeah,
it kind of shows like the abuse that she's been through when like people who are in abusive relationships actually get like a chance to leave it. They're not able to take it because I guess they don't think that they can find something better.
Yeah.
I guess I liked Vi as well as a character, and not just because she's super hot. But I think that the difference there is my frustration over a lot of the characters and some naivete that I'm perceiving is it just seems like we're in this super grimdark world. Terrible stuff is happening. The God King comes in and has a statue garden full of dead women in horrible poses, and like that's super super dark stuff. Like and that's not the only time, right? Like basically everything in scenario that we've seen is not good. And Vi seems like a realistic product of that world and deals with it. And she's not necessarily like a bad person, but she's definitely a great person because she's dealt with a lot of crap. But Kylar and Aline both, maybe Aline especially, I just struggle so much with these characters because they're in the same world, but they're not.
But Aline grew up. Aline for most of her life was detached from that on what's his face's estate, where she was kind of being taught like the gospel of the one God and like how and while he was a product.
Well, Aline she didn't grow up with the Drakes. She was friends with the girls, but she grew up as a servant.
She's basically, right. She's a
servant,
yeah,
but she was a servant at the Drakes for most of her life. Like as soon as Kylar.
No, she was. I thought she was at the Jadwins.
Oh, okay. Either way, she was like removed from most of the intensity of the slums and
I mean stuff. I get that argument, but just seems like everything else is so gray and dark and realistic with some characters, but then other characters are removed from that in ways that just seem kind of jarring to me.
Yeah.
Aline is pretty one-dimensional.
Yeah.
That's like, right. There's really not much to her.
And that's what I was saying, kind of like the only thing to her is her virginity. That's kind of what makes me like that was kind of the conversation, the point I guess I was trying to make about the comparison to Vi thing is like the main focus of Aline is that she's a virgin, right? Which is just,
I think her worldview. I don't think it's just her virginity. I think it's her whole worldview and like how out of place it is. She's kind of like Count Drake, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, Count Drake has the perspective because he's been like a high-ranking member of the Sakage, and then like got rid of that.
His backstory was also super interesting. I mean, I guess Aline functions to exist as somewhat of a foil to Kylar almost, or like a motivation for him, or an exploration into this whole good versus evil idea, but she just doesn't do anything on her own. But what's the Bechdel test, right? That's that thing where it's like, does this female character exist to do anything other than appeal to the mission of the man or whatever? Like, I would say no. Like, she doesn't really do anything on her own.
Yeah. Okay. so I did want to talk about the narratives, like the actual plot of the book, which I thought was really strong. That's why I was kind of disagreeing with you about, Stephen. Like, I think that the looking back on the second book, because I'm about halfway through the third, I think that Logan, like his plot line in the whole was really kind of compelling, and like
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree.
I
I
agree.
like
I thought
one.
that was like a really kind of like forging in the furnace of like affliction moment, of
Yeah.
like, where are his morals, like where are those lines. So, and we can talk
Uh-huh.
more about all of these things, but I just wanted to kind of run through them. I thought that that was really interesting. I thought that Kylar, like the first kind of half generally of him trying to figure out everything with Eileen, combined with him figuring out that he was actually going to be the Night Angel and like delivering justice, and then going straight into like, okay, well, how am I going to kill the God King, and going on that mission. Like, I thought that those, both of those narratives, like, I think that the second was much stronger than the first, but I think that they both made sense. And then third, with getting to know Vi a lot more, I think did add, even though like we already talked about the issues with her character, I think it did add to the book, and the how everything came together at the end was, I think, really interesting. Um, and so I think those three kind of plot lines all were really strong, and I think any one of them was kind of stronger than like most of the narrative plot lines of the first book, in my opinion. So that's why I kind of,
Mhm.
that's what makes me like this book more than the first.
I think I agree with most of what you, I like all of those things that you said more than the beginning. I think the beginning of the book is the weakest. And I mean, sure, maybe there's some cringe parts throughout, but I thought once you get past that first part, it is pretty good. It opens up into some interesting, especially the Logan part. And I thought the Vi parts were really good. I mean, maybe by the end when she's just kind of infatuated with Kyler, that is a little bit like, oh, come on, let's let this strong independent woman be kind of strong and independent, and rather than just love Kylar immediately. But
Who
other than that,
also, Kylar
yeah.
isn't that cool. Like, Vi could do so much better than Kylar, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, so to play devil's advocate, Kylar is kind of like the first like man that she's been, who's like, or been around for an extended period of time, who's like halfway decent, at least that we know about. I
That's
mean,
true.
I think it does. I like Steven's mention though, is like, why can't we let Vi be strong and independent with like on her own, without like suddenly, yeah, just becoming infatuated with Kylar. I think that is totally valid and would prove that, Vi and Aline, like I think they would just, I like what you said about the test. They would, Aline more so than Vi just seems like her storyline just totally revolves around Kylar and her relationship with him, and doesn't have as much substance on its own as Vi's does. But yeah, Vi is great. How we find out like her relationship to the God King, and how she's an Orsul, and she has the compulsion on
Mhm.
her that has like actually pushed her to kill Jarl, or which is something we still haven't even talked about, with is Jarl
Yeah.
being set up as, this savior, and you're like, oh, okay, like Kylar's friend is going to be the next person, the next head of the Sakage, and then all of a sudden it was like, no, he's dead.
Yeah.
Just to play devil's advocate on my take that Vi was a strong and independent woman. I mean, she's also kind of not, right? She's being compulsed by the God King and can't really escape that. And she also has so much, trauma, psychological trauma, that she can be manipulated pretty easily. So like, she's strong in the
Yeah.
sense that she can kill people and is very accomplished and can get out of a lot of situations just through physical prowess. But at the same time, she's not like stable or independent in that she's going to act and do anything on her own without being pointed in a direction.
I mean, isn't everybody, or all the teenagers, pretty capable of being manipulated? I mean, Sister Ariel basically like points Vi lets her run off and then is like, oh yeah, Kylar, like lies that way. You know, she just kind of like directs both of them, and then they just do exactly what she
I mean, she
intended them.
she is an Aes Sedai, so what do you expect?
Yeah, she's the Moiraine of this book.
Yeah.
Basically, yes. Yeah, let's go back to Jarl though, because I think I said it after the first book, I was like, Jarl's awesome. He's really interesting and very capable, and seems like he could be somewhat of the future of the slums of Scenaria. And him dying was honestly pretty surprising, because I thought this character had a lot of potential, but he just dies.
Yeah, that was pretty brutal. I kept waiting for the fake out death for Jarl.
No, not in this case. Yeah.
Not in this case.
Yeah, it's I think it was good because like Kylar and friends had like plot armor up until this point, so
Yeah.
it's good that Jarl died. I mean, sorry, it's not good that Jarl died, but I think it's good that it makes it a bit more real, because in the first review we talked a little bit about how the world is very grim dark, but the characters are almost like contrasting. They're like a contrast to that, because like the characters and the stories don't necessarily seem like they would fit in such a dark world, if that makes sense, where like these events are happening, where the God King is like actively taking like sisters and like, you know, people they love, and like, you know, sexually assaulting and whatever worse things doing to these girls, and then letting the Lady Jadwin turn them into statues. Just to name one example. So like I guess it's like an interesting, the characters and the world are a strange contrast that I can't really think of another. I'm sure there's other books, but I can't think of one off the top of my head that does that.
The issue is for me, like, is this intentional, or is this kind of like, I don't know. That's why I keep going back and forth.
Yeah.
Like, on if this is like the juxtaposition is intentional or not.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you that Jarl dying kind of did a lot to make the stakes seem real. Like, our characters can actually be affected by all of the darkness in the world. Look, here is someone that you like that's been killed by someone else that you kind of like. I mean, at that point, maybe we didn't really like by as much, but you grow to. And so this seems like something that would happen in the grimdark world.
Also,
but then at the same time, all the credit that, you know, like that was raised with Jarl dying, like I guess the more believability and the characters, you know, it all goes away once Durzo's like, hey, I got one more chance at life.
Dude, did you, were you just thinking of me, like, Ryan, when I was saying that in the first book, how like it was just one too many fake out deaths, where you're just like, oh, just wait until the end of the second book.
I was like, Josh is gonna love what happens.
Oh my
to
gosh.
Durzo.
You took away my rant on it. I was gonna go hard, but
well, sorry. You could still go into a rant on it.
I might still, but I wanted to go back to, okay, so Vi killing
I mean,
Jarl.
I feel like, honestly, I feel like you need to read the third book before you can come to a full conclusion.
No, I was thinking about that. No, screw that. We give like,
okay, wait, do you want to go into your rant now, or do you want to continue with the Jarl thing?
Rant now, just because I was going to go back to the Jarl thing, but that comment.
Okay,
yeah,
pause.
No.
Josh rant happening now.
Josh rant. No, okay. A fake out death is a fake out death, no matter like if it's like if there's a purpose behind it, like have it be like foreshadowed that it's going to be a fake out death or something. Like, this is just like you go through a whole book.
Isn't it? I mean, Kylar comes back from the dead. Durzo has gone through similar things. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah, but the whole thing was that he wouldn't have that anymore. Like, it just completely like takes away the impact of his like sacrifice, in my opinion. And like him giving like that gift to Kylar, like I just feel like it completely like undoes like all these, you know, like not only like it does it undo the stakes, but also undoes the impact of his character arc so far.
You mean, you think that if Durzo knew that he was going to come back to life, he should have, like, maybe we should have guessed that that was the case based off of how he was acting before he died?
Yeah. I don't know. Like, to me, fake out deaths are always going to be problematic. Like, if the reader is led to believe firmly that a character is dead, then there has to be a really good reason to bring that character back, and it has to be done in a really delicate way, and not just a note at the ending of the following book that, oh, I'm still alive. Like, it has, I don't know.
What do you think
I'm really torn.
about?
So, okay,
I don't
like,
want no spoilers for other series, but what do you think about the way that Brandon Sanderson does some
I think
fake out deaths that are kind of in similar parts of the books?
I think he rightfully gets a lot of flack for that on a lot of subreddits. I think a lot of people don't like it. And I think that some of the ways he handles things, okay, like with the way that he handles the fake out death in the Stormlight archive, I'm trying to keep things very vague, but
yeah,
I think
what
you know
I'm
what
referring to as well. Yeah.
I think that one was done pretty poorly. I think that the quote unquote fake out death in the Mistborn series is done a lot better, because it has an actual, like, that is ties into like the whole magic system of the whole Cosmere, and the impact isn't lessened because the impact on the characters isn't taken away. Like, I'm trying to keep very, very vague generalities, but do you can you kind of see what I'm saying? Like, it's not like, yeah, it's not like, oh, now the characters don't actually have to deal with the impact of that death because that character just now comes back to life. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to keep things very general, but so there's like two kind of examples that are thrown out there.
I interrupted your rant, so you can continue now.
So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I won't go on that big of a rant, but
Already
I feel like this is like
took away the head of steam from you.
I guess no, this is like just the textbook way of not to handle a fake out death. It's like okay, this character is dead. You are told they are dead. You are told that characters go dig out the grave and see the body. You are time after time after time, you are told that they are dead. And then just randomly at the ending of the second book, you get a note saying, oh, no, I'm still alive. Like, come on. That is like the textbook way not to handle a fake out death. Something like Harry Potter. I guess we can do spoilers for Harry Potter.
Yeah, I think Harry Potter's fine. I was thinking of,
that's a fine fake out death. He dies, he goes and learns something, he comes back. Fine, whatever. That is what it is. And it ties into the whole Deathly Hallows. Like, he put together this whole magic system that made him master of death. Like,
yeah,
Harry dying is a textbook way of how to handle a fake out death, like, properly. And
maybe the way that Harry Potter should not have done it, which they didn't, was if Dumbledore came back to life.
Yes. Yeah. That would have cheapened his death. It would have cheapened the impact on his death on all the characters. All their characters going through like 2 whole books of grieving would have been for naught, and it would have been made Dumbledore seem like a bad guy. And I guess okay, well, we're only doing spoilers for the second book, but yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. I feel like I've ranted enough. That was by far the dumbest, stupidest part of the whole book.
I think that criticism can be applied to other things too. I think that Weeks has a lot of really cool ideas that feel rushed, or the execution isn't quite right. And the example that I keep coming back to is the reveal that Durzo is a Kalis Thorn at the end of book 1, where he signs it Aethorn, and then Kylar's like, oh yeah, wasn't Dorson Alcesti's buddy named a Kalis Thorn? Oh yeah, so Durzo is probably a Kalis Thorn. Like, I think that was like anticlimactic. And I think there's more examples in book 3, especially, that I can talk about, but I'm not going to, because this is a book 2 review.
Thank you.
There are other ones in book 2, but I'm blanking and I can't think of them right now. But my point still stands. Cool concepts executed poorly is a tough thing to overcome, and I recognize it more on my reread now than I did on my first read through.
The good thing is, I feel like in Lightbringer, he does a lot of these things better. Like, the twists are better. They're really shocking. The characters go through a lot of cool growth. There's everything. Everything is more interesting in Lightbringer, which is why, honestly, Ryan, I'm still surprised that you don't like Lightbringer as much as Night Angel. So this gives me a lot of hope that Night Angel Nemesis is really good. I think it can be. I think the world is really interesting and the characters are there. And so if Weeks can come back to this world after 5 books that I thought were all really good, and like Lightbringer is definitely a series that I would recommend without the qualms of that we talked about recommending Night Angel. So I guess this is just kind of a tangential way of me saying, like, even though I didn't necessarily love this book or the Night Angel trilogy, I thought it was maybe just kind of like an okay average trilogy. I do think that the reboot with Night Angel Nemesis has a lot of potential.
I agree.
I think Kylar's better than Kip. I think I said that in our last review, but I didn't really like Kip that much as the main character.
Kip was annoying, especially in the first 2 books. Okay, can I go back to the Jarl thing, the Jarl death?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's.
As long as you don't rant about fake out deaths, I guess.
Okay, it's kind of okay. My issue with the Kylar or with the Jarl death is the way that it's reframed at the end was that she had like no choice but to kill him, and because of the compulsion from the God King, like, and that was kind of, I mean, I get that it was kind of foreshadowed, like she was trying to put the arrow down, but it like slipped from her hands, and she like killed Jarl. To me, that's like what makes this series like not grimdark really. Like, you never really blamed her for Jarl's death, whereas I feel like it would have been a more like interesting character to have to deal with, like, okay, this character just like knowingly killed her friend and character you like, and like now it's going to be harder to make her sympathetic, but once you do make her sympathetic, then it's going to be much more satisfying, kind of like Jamie in A Song of Ice and Fire. Like, here's a character that starts off kind of like the being, you know, the worst you can be, like, you know, having sex with his sister and like pushing a kid out of a window, like starting off super bad, and then like slowly George R.R. Martin puts the work into redeeming him. Like, I feel like to a lesser extent that's kind of how Vi was like kind of meant to be. Like, here's this bad character that now is slowly being redeemed, but like it's like she wasn't really that bad because she was being, like, you find out that she was just being like having compulsion used against her for most of the time. So I kind of wish that wasn't leaned away from as much, just to make it easier to accept Vi as like a quote unquote good person.
I mean, in the 3rd book kind of leans into this type of idea even more, but again, we're not reviewing the 3rd book.
The more I think about the characters, the more I think that there was an attempt to make them gray characters, but most of like the protagonists aren't really gray characters.
They have like really at their core, they're all good people in bad circumstances, rather than like Josh was saying in Game of Thrones, there's some legit bad people in bad circumstances.
Right.
Then we realize, maybe if we look at them in another light, they're not as bad, or they're doing some things that are somewhat good, or we can justify their actions that are bad from one perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing about Vi though is she sets out to kill Kylar to try and save Jarl, right? So it's like she is like bad in the sense that she's trying to save somebody but still killing somebody else who isn't necessarily bad.
Yeah, but she never does any of that. Like, she doesn't kill Kylar.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, is those things are set up, but like you never actually have to deal with her doing those things, which I feel like would have been much more interesting from a character study perspective. Like, and again, going back to Lightbringer, what's the main the grandpa
Gavin Andros. Like, there's a gray / bad villainous character.
All right,
but no, just very compelling. I don't know. Like, I'm not saying he does anything. Like, if he,
I feel like
you just, but like
Andros is kind of like a huge question mark.
Yeah.
You know, you never know which way he's going to go really until the end.
But just, that was so expertly done that, again, Stephen, like, I think an Andros type character that like actually gets played out like Andros does, like not in terms of like specific plot points or anything like that, but just like somebody that, is like, they're going to do what's best for them. And that, like, and whatever that is, like, would work really, really well in this type of role.
I remember you saying, Ryan, in our first review that Brent Weeks said he wanted to try more in the Night Angel universe, but didn't think that he was skilled enough as an author, or like wanted to hone his craft a little bit more. So ended up doing Lightbringer, and now he's coming back to it. So yeah, maybe he identified that as like, look, I have the super dark world that's really compelling, but it's tough to write these characters that fit the world as much as they need to. So Lightbringer's not quite as dark as a world. I mean, it's still kind of like your dark medieval world, but it's not, there's not nearly the level of atrocities that we have going on in Night Angel. So maybe he's kind of leaning that direction, and now he's going to try to come back to Night Angel.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, he didn't say exactly what reasons he felt like he wasn't good enough to write the next novel in the world. I think that would be an interesting question to ask him. Like, why did you feel you weren't ready when you finished Beyond the Shadows? I think that's the third book. And why do you feel like you're ready now?
It would be interesting. And I feel like, most authors, they're professionals, they're level-headed. Like Sanderson did this video with Murphy Napier that I watched today, where he talks about his books. And he's like, look, this book was not as strong as the other ones because of these reasons. I really struggled with it. And I think he recognizes, and I'm sure he's like reads reviews and tries to hone his craft, right? So I think any author worth 2 cents is gonna try to figure out how they can be better. And that makes sense. Anyway, we got kind of distracted. Let's come back to the Logan plotline, because I thought this one was pretty cool, and Logan was a really compelling character. And the end where he goes into the hole, that was a highlight, something that I remembered from my very first read of The Way of Shadows. So him now just dealing with his humanity and figuring out to what level he's going to go to survive is pretty interesting. On the flip side, I thought maybe he's just kind of like there for a long time without a ton of advancement. Like they try some things, don't really ever make a ton of progress. Eventually Kyler rescues them. Maybe it would have been nice if he got out on his own somehow, and then Kyler kind of like bumped into him as he was already on his way out, because that maybe makes Logan a little more capable. But I thought his whole survival story and befriending and becoming like the leader of these savages, and then how it became important for the battle at the end when the homunculus thing was like composed of his former friends, that all tied together really well. Like that narrative arc was very well done for Logan,
which I think was essential to have happen in book 2, because, and no spoilers for book 3, but those, like Logan, you rooting for Logan is really essential for book 3 from about halfway through it. And you need to be like, Logan in book 1 was fine, but he wasn't really like, there's no reason why I would be rooting for him to be king versus
he was pretty one-dimensional in the first book. He's another kind of like a idyllic, virtuous character in the first book that we maybe had a harder time getting behind because he just doesn't seem realistic. But now he seems like he's gone through it and is much more developed.
How do you think being in the hole changed Logan? Like, in the sense that at the end of the book, you're wondering, like, how is this whole conflict going between Logan and Tara? Like, how's it going to resolve? And then Logan ends up, like, surprisingly just like bending the knee and like letting Tara become queen, because it's not gonna, it's ultimately, that's what's better for the kingdom. Do you think that would have changed if Logan, if he hadn't been through the hole? Do you think he would have just decided
like he would have
married
if he had?
He would have married her at that point.
Yeah, or just been willing to like declare himself king and then let everything, break loose. Maybe not. I mean, I just think that it really showed him that like ruling over nothing isn't important. It's about how you rule and how you like position yourself to rule. That's like going to be important. I think that's kind of what the whole taught him, and I think that was pretty important for that scene.
His choice is interesting because, and maybe it's probably intentional by Weeks, because it seems like he's making the same mistake that his father made, right? Because at the beginning of the first book, his father decides not to depose King Gundr, or depose Gundr, so then Gundr becomes the king, and then ends up making a bunch of bad choices.
Kind of, except his father goes through with the marriage, the loveless marriage, right? And Logan decides he doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, that's true. I guess either way, he would have been making a decision kind of like his father, either the loveless marriage or like bending the knee to save like bloodshed now.
I could see an argument saying after Logan came out of the hole and everything he went through there, maybe he should have been a little more hardened and been like, screw it, Terra sucks. I'm going to become king here and I'm willing to make these sacrifices. But I think that him going through the hole changed his character enough where that decision is compelling. To previously would have been like, okay, here's this honorable dude. I'm sure he'll just do whatever's honorable. Like, this is not an interesting situation. But now, since he doesn't have that quite as much, the reader is a little more intrigued as to like, okay, how is he going to approach this? Because this is a tough situation. What does his honor demand? What's best for the kingdom? What is the character going to do now that he's kind of seen some crap? And I think that's really important for book 3 with some of the choices that he has to make there.
I think the last important thing that I wanted to talk about is the rings that Kylar buys for Aline. And
oh yeah, how did we not talk about that?
I think I liked the ending. I'm just gonna say where Vi has to ring Kylar in order to break the compulsion, even though it's, I guess that is kind of seen as, similar to rape, because you're forcing somebody into this like emotional bond that they might not, or this magical bond.
I think that this was a very strong point of the book. I think it was well foreshadowed. It was one of those like Sanderlange moments of like you see it coming like right before it happens, like everything clicks into place and you're like, oh dang, yeah, this is of course what's going to need to happen in this moment.
It was a really good Chekhov's gun with the rings.
Yeah. The one kind of criticism I have, and this is going back to like comparisons to Wheel of Time, is like it's so similar to
forcing
water bond.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil things, but yes. It's so similar to it, right? Where a certain protagonist, main character.
Well, we don't need to even say that. We just need to say that like
it's really similar to the water bond and some things that happen as a result.
Yeah, some things and how the violation that characters feel. Yeah, it's just to me, it's just with all the other kind of comparisons to the Wheel of Time that pop up throughout this book, it felt like, I don't know, maybe that's just me reading into it, because I really did enjoy that how that went down. It was really interesting and well.
I could see that, but honestly, like I'm okay with plot devices being reused as long as it's not too on the nose. And I mean, I did complain before, like, oh, there's the Aes Sedai, there's the Children of the Light, and it does seem like those factions are really similar. They're just not as explained enough. So I think you can complain about it and kind of joke about it, but at the same time, I don't think it's a real big deal. I think it's fine. Like there are so many plot devices that authors use. Like there's no way to come up with an entirely unique thing.
Yeah, it just felt okay. All right, fair enough.
So I think we can all agree that in this context, it was we liked it.
Yeah, I thought it worked really well. Where she had to, all those events, right? She had to break the compulsion. She kills the God King. The homunculus thing, I think that's what it's called. Is
Ferali?
Ferali, right? Okay, maybe there's another thing called the homunculus. They're both kind of like Frankenstein monsters.
Yeah, the thing out on the battlefield.
Okay, right, Ferali. That's probably what it's called. That he loses control. Logan's then able to take over because of his connection there. And then Kylar is dead, but he comes back really fast and he stops the God King's death curse. Like those events, bam, bam, bam. That was cool. That was really well done. And pretty similar to the way that the Way of Shadows ended in terms of just like really exciting ending events, happened all pretty fast. We end up going back to the throne room and Scenario once again, which maybe is something that you could nitpick. Like it would have been cooler to maybe expand a little bit or do something more unique. But yeah, I thought the ending was all in all really good.
Nice. Yeah, I agree.
What do you think of the "You are not my" or "I am not your father"? Star Wars fake out there.
I thought it was like a funny. I thought it was funny, but then I think Gareth or Sewell being like, "Ha ha ha! You thought you were actually my son." I thought that was like. I think it would have been funny to like let the reader and like Kylar think that, and then like turn it on its nose. Where like, I don't know, do something else where it's not like just so like blatantly said, I guess.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
don't know. I don't know. What do you guys think about it? I feel like you guys think
It
differently.
was. I think it was a little cringe, but also kind of funny. Like it's obviously memorable enough for me to mention. I thought it was fine.
As a reader, you're kind of like, oh no, like is Kylar like
Yeah, it does
Kylar's
kind of
an
lead you to think that for a
F-wing?
while because it's like the mystery of his parentage is hinted at a little bit.
Yeah,
Like, what does Azoth mean? Why does he have a cool name when
yeah,
everyone else is named Rat and Doll Girl, right?
yeah, that's true. And then I mean, at this point, you're like, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense, because you always expect like, oh, an orphan doesn't know his parents, like his parents are gonna end up being like the king, or
Right.
somebody great. And so that's something that I had forgotten on my read through,
All right. I
my
feel like
first read through.
that wraps our review of Shadow's Edge.
Wait. I
Any-
want to go. So
Oh,
I just want to rank them out of 10.
okay.
So
Yeah.
last time I gave the first book a 9 out of 10. And I think you guys both gave it, I think, like a 7
was
or
I did 7, Josh did 6.
okay. All right. So I'll start. I think I gave the first book a 9 out of 10. I think this book is an 8 out of 10.
Interesting. I think it's a 7.5 out of 10. So it's funny that like I'm still ranking it lower than you, even though I liked it more in the first book. But
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, okay, fair enough.
I'm going to go to 6.5 out of 10. I feel like you guys kind of talked me up a little bit through the conversation.
All right.
I probably would have been like 6 going in, but I'm going up to 6.5.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's good, and part of that is my nostalgia. Is part of my enjoyment. Once again, I've said this before, but I'm much more aware of the flaws in this, and I think I still enjoy it in spite of those flaws.
Fair enough.
As I feel like that's a line from Patrick Rothfuss: to love something despite its flaws, that's true love, Ryan.
Okay, Steven.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm pretty sure that's in one of the books. I like that line.
All right, well, put it in your book and then credit me at the end.
No, I can't steal his lines. I got to come up with my own things for my books.
No, that was my line. I did it first.
All right, that's a wrap for our review of Shadow's
no.
Edge. We'll wrap up with Beyond the Shadows probably next week, since I think we're all pretty close to finishing it. And nice job, guys, not doing any spoilers for the third book, even though it's so fresh. I feel like we did a pretty good job with that.
Nice.
I mean, Ben's not here, right?
Yeah, well, we just spoiled every other major fantasy series out there, so
Yeah.
No, we didn't. We did comparisons, but we didn't say anything specific other than Harry Potter. But I mean, come on. Harry Potter's fine.
Nice. Okay. All right. Sounds good.
All right. See everyone later. Bye.
See ya.
Bye.